The next chapter begins with Bruce Banner hard at work on his modifications to the zombie virus that was quickly spreading on this Earth. With now even the likes of Dr. Amano infected, all she could mutter was the mysterious name Jasper from the previous episode. With the aid of Jarvis, Banner researched just who this could be, where they discovered there was a Jasper who was associated with Amano's research team, but his full data file was somehow corrupted. Doing an expanded search, Banner once more pulled up the recording this Jasper took of Toshiko during their initial research into the virus, where he made an interesting discovery. In one of the monitors behind the doctor, Bruce was able to zoom in, where he saw a direct strain of the illness, but this one was different from the one Amano had showed him when the outbreak had first begun. Looking further into things, Banner came to a shocking realization. Unbeknownst to Amano, someone had altered her research, hence why the antivirus did not work as it should have, further proving that everything was playing into this mysterious puppet master's hands. Concluding that it must be this Jasper, Bruce used his brilliant mind to analyze the strain of the original disease, thereby creating a new antivirus, one that he believed could finally end this undead threat. Receiving a knock at the door, Bruce, believing it was still the self-aware Toshiko, was excited to test this discovery on her and get her back to normal, only to see that the poor woman had been fully taken over by the virus and was ready to munch on his curly-haired head. Startled by this jump scare, Banner felt his heart rate elevate and used his meditation techniques to keep himself calm, as he needed his mind, not the brawn of the Hulk, to aid in the situation. Wondering just how the doctor turned so fast, Bruce heard the knocking suddenly halt, where much to his horror, he saw that Toshiko had somehow made her way inside and to the unconscious, infected Black Widow. Going in to feast, Banner stopped the woman in her tracks, where she sunk her teeth into his heavily armored protective suit, thus preventing him from becoming infected. Struggling to keep the woman at bay, the scientist was astounded at how strong Amano had become, only for things to steep further into hell, as now Natasha's transformation had completed, where she went to bite into the man who was trying to save her. Defenseless against the empowered zombie women, they managed to infect Banner, who began his transformation into a zombified and enraged version of the Hulk. Coming back to the other Avengers members, we see the tattered and bloodied remains of the carnage left behind after the crowd of undead blew themselves to pieces in the previous issue. Here we see a still conscious Captain America rescue Iron Man and Hawkeye from the wreckage, where he went to get them to safety, only where he too gave in to his injuries and collapsed in the ruined streets. Having a nightmare centering around the events of the first Captain America movie, Steve awoke and, much to his shock, still was not transformed into an undead, despite seemingly being infected from the attack. Having been transported to what appeared to be some sort of barricaded bar, he saw the unconscious Tony and Clint, who too were apparently still human and unharmed. Wondering just how they could have survived, Steve was met by a strange man in protective gear who removed his helmet, and we see a man who was basically the manga version of Moist Critical, who revealed himself as Dr. Scott. With both Tony and Clint awakening as well, Steve told them that this man had saved them, with all three wondering just who he was. This Dr. Scott then claimed he was something of a scientist himself who was helping people during the outbreak. He discovered the unconscious Avengers after the blast and had brought them back here and had injected them with a cure that he created, thus saving their lives. With Clint and Steve both amazed that he had come up with a cure on his own, Tony, being rightfully skeptical, asked just who in the world this guy was. With Cap telling Stark not to be rude, Tony pushed the envelope, demanding for this man to reveal himself, for Tony had a record of the most brilliant minds on the planet, and for this man to randomly show up and cure an unknown alien virus in no time was definitely suspicious. Asking again for his identity, the man simply repeated his phrase from before, that he was Dr. Scott and was trying to save the world. Not buying it, Tony had Jarvis run a scan, only for the computer in his suit to be offline as it was damaged in the explosion. We then discover this was no ordinary blast. It was what Dr. Scott addressed as waterpox, which was a virus that would cause the infected to break out in blisters like the one we saw before. They would swell to the point where they would explode, causing the virus to go airborne to infect more, thus creating an unending saga of undead. Given his studies, Scott told the men that it normally takes about 3 to 5 hours for an infected to develop these blisters, which raised alarm bells for all of them, as it had been over 3 hours since Black Widow and Thor had contracted the disease. Suiting up to save their friends, the team was stopped by Scott, who gave them the last of the cure that he produced, along with his files on his research, so they could make more. Asking the man to come with them, Scott opted to stay behind as there were still more people who needed his help. Thanking the man for his assistance, they asked for the doctor's full name, where with a smile, he only repeated once again that he was Dr. Scott, Dr. Jasper Scott. As the heroes flew off, Jasper made his way inside the building, where he began to talk to himself, overjoyed that he finally got to meet his idol Tony Stark after all this time. While delighted to have met the man, we then see Jasper bring out a mysterious suitcase, where he laments that Tony had gotten softer in his old age and was more impressive in years past. Making his way downstairs, we then see that the man was not alone, where he creepily asked this other party if they agreed with him. We then see just who this party was, which was an entire dark room filled with captive humans that Jasper had been abducting. He then quickly dropped the Savior Scientist act and quickly went to Mad Scientist, where we then see that he had idolized Tony when he made weapons of mass destruction, declaring that it was like a form of art. Armed with a vial of the Chitauri zombie virus, the psychotic doctor then told these horrified people that it was time to pick up where Stark had left off. Making their way back to Avengers Tower, we see the heroes discover that things had taken an even greater turn for the worse as they look on in the ruined lab where they found the fully transformed Hulk. With Tony asking Bruce just what he had done, we see the brute turn around, revealing his bloodied and rotted infected face.